Hello, good evening from St. Peter's in Hove, and good evening to another step along our journey through St. Mark's Passion narrative. I just want to talk about one single verse tonight. We've arrived at chapter 14, verse 65. The Sanhedrin has condemned Jesus to death unanimously. Some of them then started spitting at his face, hitting him and saying, "Play the prophet." And the attendants struck him too. In some of the other translations, you have the impression that they play a sort of a vague version, a funny sort of version of Blind Man's Buff, that he's blindfolded and struck. To spit at somebody's face is very, very insulting. Even today, it is considered it's a form of assault. It's illegal. They started spitting at his face, hitting him and saying, "Play the prophet." And the attendants struck him too. So the high priests do this, and also the attendants, the servants. So the whole household joins in, not just mocking the Saviour, but humiliating him, tormenting him, a form of mental torture, hitting him as well, a form of physical torture. It brings to mind, the word we're looking here is face. It brings to mind the disfigurement that Jesus is to experience during his passion. This is the first step along the road to the complete disfigurement of Jesus Christ on the cross. As the prophet Isaiah says, he hardly looked human anymore, talking about the suffering servant. His face, which was a fair face, is now made into a subject of mockery, something that is disfigured, something that is defaced. That's what we call it. To deface something is to disfigure it. This brings to mind the words of the hymn. It's a very old hymn dating from the 13th century, translated by Ronald Knox. It's also set to music by Bach. It's a very beautiful hymn. "O sacred head, ill-used, by reed and bramble scarred, that idle blows have bruised and mocking lips have marred. How dimmed that eye so tender, how wan those cheeks appear, how overcast the splendour that angel hosts revere." What we get in this hymn and also in this verse from St. Mark's Gospel is a very clear idea of what sin is. Sin is that which disfigures the human face. Sin is that which takes away the dignity of the human being. Takes away the dignity of the human being who is sinned against, but it also destroys the dignity of the human being who is sinning. This mocking of Christ has been painted by quite a few Renaissance artists, and they liked painting it because they showed Jesus sitting there impassively, the man of sorrows acquainted with grief. That was a challenge to render that expression, but also it gave them the chance to render the horrible expressions of his tormentors, the way their faces were disfigured by hatred, they were snarling with envy. And so Jesus is surrounded by Jesus, the compassionate one, is surrounded by people who are the very opposite of compassionate, people who are cruel tormentors. Cruelty is a terrible, terrible sin. One of the things that, of course, we've read the Passion many times, we've seen the Passion many times illustrated for us. We forget the cruelty of the Passion, and we forget too that these people who tormented Jesus, both the high priests and their servants, and later the Romans, had got used to tormenting other people. And this is a terrible, terrible state to get yourself into. It's not just Jesus is disfigured, they have disfigured themselves in disfiguring Jesus. So we must have horror of sin. We must have a horror of the sin of cruelty to others. We must have a horror of the sin of sadism. We must have the horror of the sin of envy, the sin of the vice of wanting to punish other people in this way. It's wrong, wrong, wrong. One verse, that's all it takes to open up for us a whole world in which so much wrong can be done. See you all tomorrow evening. Goodbye for now.